On September 6, 2013, a website called Bare Naked Islam posted a blog spot that began with the following lament. Aren't there enough Islamofascists in America trying to sell their crap sandwich that Islam is a religion of peace? Now there's a Dahimi Presbyterian pastor pushing his crap book on churches about why our justified fear and loathing of Islam is without merit. How about sending him to Syria? I would love to post a video of this moron having his head cut off by Al-Qaeda over there. The Presbyterian pastor in question was me. Readers of the blog added their own dreams of my demise. They called me a traitor and an idiot. Strong words, but do they have any merit? All violent fantasies aside, are those of us building bridges between Islam and Christianity promoting a godless, violent, oppressive faith? Are we being ignorant and unfaithful? The last I checked, a simple Google search using the words Islam in America yielded as its first result a website for an organization called the Clarion Project. I clicked on the link and found myself confronted with an image of a blonde, blue-eyed woman with a veil covering her face. The image was superimposed over a photo of the Boston Marathon bombing. The website invited me to watch a video called The Third Jihad, which according to the website, explores the presence of radical Islam in America and the emerging risk that this homegrown jihad poses to national security and Western liberties. The Third Jihad is a low-budget film with a startling message. Muslims are infiltrating America, attempting to tear down our liberties and our secular laws and to replace these cherished institutions with oppression and with the mandates of Sharia or Islamic law. For those who disseminate such fear, Islam represents an outside, existential threat to the American way of life. But are such fears in any way connected to Islam as it actually is practiced in the United States? Is Islam un-American? And are Muslims really so dissatisfied with American society that they would like to see our Constitution and our civil laws replaced with Sharia? A recent study by the Pew Center for Religion and Society shows that Muslim Americans are actually more likely to be patriotic than are their non-Muslim counterparts. And as for the notion that Islam is a recent foreign religious import, it's a suggestion that would come as a surprise to African American Muslims who have been practicing Islam in North America since the earliest days of the transatlantic slave trade.
Islam in America does genuinely have indigenous roots. It is rooted in the experiences that are quintessentially American. It's an amazing conversation that sometimes just gets left out, and I think even as I deal with my brothers and sisters in the Black church, which I organize with a lot on the south side of Chicago, I often say, look, none of you have to become Muslim, and you don't have to, but you should all still embrace Islam as a quintessential part of the Black American experience. Which it is. It's undeniably a part of that experience. You can't get beyond Alex Haley's roots and not confront a Muslim African, enslaved African as a protagonist, Kunta Kinte from the Mandinka Muslim tribe. You can't really even encounter basic African American literature and the contributions of people, some of the first extraordinary literary contributions, and the first even largest document ever assembled by a slave in captivity was the Quran, that was actually written by memory by an enslaved African. And we have that now on display at the Dusable Museum on the south side of Chicago. What's extraordinary, of course, about it is that it was reproduced by a slave in captivity who, if even caught reading the Bible, could have been whipped to death, let alone trying to rewrite the entire Quran, which he successfully did.
There are estimates that 1/3 of all Muslims in America actually would identify as African American. And what is very peculiar is, you notice in media portrayals of Muslims in America that African Americans are largely absent. The Muslims who are called upon to do interviews and to do media appearances, they are usually Muslims that come from immigrant backgrounds, right? Whether they're first generation, second generation, third generation even. which is a very interesting thing because it sort of reinforces the idea that Islam is really a religion that's imported. It's as though African American Islam is somehow, you know, a force that's only on the margins, that isn't really important, that's an afterthought. What is very special about the presence of Islam in America is the legacy of African American Islam. And, you know, it turns out that the very roots of Islam's presence in this country have to do with a demand for social justice, with a demand for treating everyone with a level of humanity and dignity and respect. And so when you have, you know, the emergence of African American Islam and its sort of relationship with the civil rights movements of the 60s and the early 70s, you really have the history of Muslims using Islamic theology to demand justice from Americans. And that history places, I think, calls out to us from the past and places a demand on Muslims today. You are not just African American, to really stand up for you know, the possibilities for Muslims to be dignified, to be respected, while they are critical of the things that are endangering the lives of Muslims in this country and abroad.
I think one of the glories of America is that there are the privileges and responsibilities of citizenship. And I think that any community ought to consider quite carefully what its responsibilities are, what it's contributing, how it's enriching their nation. And I think one of the ways in which Muslims can enrich is this sense that just as diversity is woven into the DNA of the American project, so is it woven into the DNA of Islam. And so being in America gives us a chance as Muslims to go back into the roots of Islam and to recover those Quranic verses or those stories of Abyssinia or the moments in which the Prophet Muhammad built relationships with the Jews and Christians and even the pagans of his area, is to recover those moments in Islam and bring them out so that those stories strengthen the diversity story in America.
The Muslim experience in America then, again, not only through the African American experience, but even through some of the first early immigrants, were part and parcel of a quintessentially American story. And that's what makes America and Muslim American narrative such a unique one, is that there's always been a space within the United States and within the American project to challenge and agitate America to live up to unfulfilled, lofty ideals. And sometimes that challenge has come through, you know, some extraordinary sacrifices. It's come through in efforts of women organizing, it came through unions, it came through whole successive waves of folks who have always found a way and space within America, or the means to create that space within America, to become part of this evolving American narrative. And Muslims in the early 20th century were certainly part of that, challenging our racial narratives. The larger evolution of Islam in America, even dating back to some of those early, more contentious moments with Muhammad Ali, very publicly, for instance, getting up and challenging policies. We celebrate Muhammad Ali right now as a bona fide, quintessential contribution to Americana. Not just the American Muslim experience, but to what we consider as part and parcel of what it means to be an American. The ability to contest, the ability to shape, the ability to assert oneself and to think about, you know, our narratives in relationship to one another and point out contradictions. American Muslims have contributed to that in this country, and the American Muslim experience has been more embedded in the American project than we want to acknowledge. And by extension, let much more akin to us and less foreign than I think Muslims and Islam is often casted.
That's what I think Muslims deserve in this country, that they're needed, not tolerated or appreciated. This is their country as it is ours, if we talk in terms of theirs and ours in terms of Christians and Muslims. They're not guests that we welcome, they're hosts that welcome Christians too.
I migrated here in 1984, and it was by choice, obviously. I wanted to, and what attracted me were the things for which this country stands for, in terms of the freedom to practice what you want to practice, the freedom of speech, liberty, and opportunities. And I'm more than happy I did. I have no regrets ever, because I think I did very well. Actually, after coming to this country, I think in some ways I practiced my religion more. At the same time, I availed all the opportunity this country does offer, and I have run successful businesses and did very well in both. I have helped found a few Islamic centers, so my religious side did not go down when I came here. And in all through these years, on a personal basis with people, I have never had any problems from anyone, ever. I have dealt in business all across the country, from north to south, east to west, from small towns to large towns, whether it be Jewish, Christian, and I've worked with everyone, never had a feeling about any personal animosity from anyone.
Most Muslims in America have come here to get away from extremists and terrorists in their own countries. The majority of them have come here to make a life for their families, to get away from what scares them. They're looking for the same thing everyone else is looking for. It's security, family, friends, community. I want a safe home for my children. If I'm going to keep quiet when there's some idiot roaming around the mosque trying to convince people to hurt my neighbors, I'm in those neighborhoods too. And so the first thing I'm going to step up and do is call the FBI or call the police and say, get this idiot out of here, because he's going to hurt us. And so I think most people need to understand that most Muslim Americans have the same fears and concerns that all of us do. All Americans have those. We're just as scared as finding that crazy person or coming across that crazy person, because they're going to hurt us as much as they're going to hurt the next person. When the Prophet himself was alive, Prophet Muhammad, his mosque served many, many purposes. It was a place for people to gather. It was a place for discussion and education. It was a place to pray. It was a place for marriages. It was a place for many things. Now, people who grow up in countries where you have a predominantly Muslim population, you're going to find that they use a mosque pretty much for going to pray. Right? That's what you do. You work outside in the outside world, and all your environment around you, all your neighbors, everyone's Muslim, so your social life and everything is outside of the mosque. And so the only reason you actually use a mosque in countries like that is to go and pray 5 times a day. Whereas in countries where Muslims are a minority, mosques are more of, they function in many different ways. They're places for Muslims to gather, to get to know each other, to form communities.
I'm a first-generation immigrant. For my children, they have a sort of living 2 lives almost. And that's within our community, we constantly talk about that we need to help them assimilate here, and we ourselves have to assimilate. Hold on to our religious. There's nothing in Islam which stops us participating in this country. 100%. I mean, I have done everything. I've done businesses, I've been very successful, worked with all. But living in isolation does not help. Actually, it makes it worse. So those are things within our community which we are trying to make sure that our people, first generation immigrants especially, understand that the children need to participate, need to be a part of it. And we need to participate in interfaith gatherings so people understand. And some of the things we do is pure baggage, it's cultural baggage, it's nothing to do with religion. And those are baggage which we need to slowly start changing. There's a lot of great things in this country, which, more so than a lot of Muslim countries, which we could say is what Islam teaches.
It's incredible. I did a presentation where I did a 2-hour training to adults. And after 2 hours of listening to my training, this person raised his hand and he goes, "So, when you say American, what do you consider yourself?" I was like, well, the whole time I kept saying American, I also kept saying we. I consider myself to be an American. And he goes, really? And I was like, yes. And he goes, how can you be a Muslim and an American? And now things like that, you want to smile, and you don't know how to explain. You don't know how to explain that, because I will even have adults come and say, so where did the Muslims come from again? So what country, what is that country Islam like? So I think what ends up happening is people are not always listening. They think they are. They think they get it, but they're not always listening. And so it's been an unusual thing, but it's funny sometimes.
Unfortunately, a lot of North Americans draw their image of Islam and Muslims from the news rather than the reality of Muslims living in North America. And so the images that they get are of violence, are of terrorism, are of riots in the street, etc. And although that gets a certain slice of reality, it's also a massive distortion of reality as well.
We Muslims know that it is holy, it's sacred to engage positively with those who are different from us. The Quran tells us that. The Prophet Muhammad's example shows us that. I think America is the best place on earth to carry that on, right? This country was born in diversity, and it has in some cases it's violated and sinned against that, but it's sought to progress. So slavery and segregation give rise to the civil rights movement, which is progress, even if it's not far and it's not fast enough. The election of Barack Obama as the first black president is progress, right? So even America's deepest mistakes and sins are things that we can seek to improve. I think America is sacred ground precisely because we live in a highly diverse environment in which we are free and open and encouraged to get to know our neighbor from a different background, our classmate, our colleague, our friend from a different background. That is holy work, I believe. So there are 600 Catholic hospitals in America, and I bet you not a one of them turns away non-Catholic patients. And there are 230 Catholic colleges, and almost every single one of them accepts non-Catholic students. And in fact, in the founding charters of many of these universities, Georgetown in the late 18th century, DePaul here in Chicago, it's explicitly expressed that the university would be Catholic in character, and that means it would welcome people from all backgrounds, right? So diversity is not just a holy or sacred project, it's also the way we build our civil society in America, which is one of the reasons that prejudice is so dangerous. Not only does it violate the particular group that's being discriminated against, but it erects a barrier for them contributing to American civil society. And there was a time in which every Catholic institution, hospital, convent, school, was viewed as a Trojan horse for papal control. Well, imagine America without its Catholic institutions. Where would we be without our 600 Catholic hospitals, our 7,000 Catholic grade schools and high schools, our 230 Catholic universities? Our civil society would be literally unimaginable. Right? So when we discriminate against a certain group of people based on their religious or racial or ethnic identity, well, not only do we violate them as human beings, which is a terrible thing to do, not only do we violate the very heart of the American project, which is to welcome people of all backgrounds into this nation, to welcome their contributions, but we don't allow them to contribute. That makes us all poorer.